Hello and welcome to our first extended version of The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. Here are the headlines. Russia's foreign minister says Russia will not pause military operations before peace talks.
Pakistan gets a new prime minister as Imran Khan is ousted from office through a no-confidence vote.
Plus, not an easy ride for Emmanuel Macron as the country's presidential election enters a second round.
Well, welcome to the program. Today, we kick things off with updates on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We're learning that a French team has arrived in Ukraine to help local investigators look into allegations of war crimes around the capital, Kyiv. France's ambassador to the country, Etienne Duponsin, made the announcement on Twitter, adding that this is the first foreign unit to offer such support. Claims of civilian killings in Bucha caused global outrage last week as Ukraine claims some 1,222 bodies were found in areas near Kyiv recently left by Russian soldiers. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow will not pause its military operations before the next round of peace talks with Ukraine, even though he also says there's no reason the talks should not go ahead. We're also learning 17 children died in the attack on the train station in Kramatorsk. Officials say 4 adults and 2 children have been discharged from hospital. And days after Russia's suspension from the UN Human Rights Council, North Korea, which was among the 24 countries that voted against the move, has now denounced the suspension. The government instead blames the United States for instigating the vote, saying in a statement that what the U.S. is after is to isolate the independent countries and forces challenging them at the international arena so as to maintain its legal and inhumane U.S.-led hegemonic order. Zimmer goes on to say international organizations should not be abused as a means for the U.S. to put political pressure on countries. Here's more on what's happening in Ukraine today.
The French ambassador's announcement comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky says tens of thousands of people are likely to have been killed in Russia's assault on the southeastern city of Mariupol. He was addressing lawmakers in South Korea via video conferencing. While the widespread destruction of Mariupol cannot be independently verified, President Zelensky has requested more military aid to help fight the Russian forces. He did not specify which weapons he sought, but said South Korea had many weapons that could not only help save the lives of ordinary Ukrainians, but help prevent Russia from attacking other nations. Germany's foreign minister Annalena Baerbock says Germany sees massive indications of war crimes in Ukraine and that the government has already made it clear that there will be a complete phase-out of fossil fuels, starting with coal, then oil and gas, so that this can be implemented jointly in the European Union. EU foreign ministers are meeting in Luxembourg today to discuss new sanction proposals for the EU oil embargo on Russia. The European Parliament last week voted for an embargo, although its decision is not binding. Galvanized by what Ukraine says are senseless killings of civilians by Russian troops since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the bloc last week approved a 5th round of sanctions on Russia that included an end to Russian coal imports.
We now have coal as part of the sanctions package. We know that the Commission is also now working on a future package that we hope we can see soon that will involve oil as well.
Meanwhile, Russia says that it had used cruise missiles to destroy S-300 anti-craft missile systems, which had been supplied to Ukraine by an independent European country. Russia launched Caliber cruise missiles on Sunday against 4 S-300 launchers, which were concealed in a hangar on the outskirts of the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Russia said 25 Ukrainian troops were hit in the attack. Russia did not say which European country had supplied the S-300 systems. And as the conflict continues in Mariupol, civilians and refugees in the city are in dire need of humanitarian aid, especially for those living in the center of Mariupol. At a hospital on the outskirts of Mariupol, more than 10 people are admitted an average day due to escalation of the conflict, most with sharpened injuries. The conflict has upended most people's lives completely in the city. Nearly 8,000 people have gathered in an humanitarian aid center for daily necessities. And in the city of Kramatorsk, a video shared by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine shows bodies on the ground, people's belongings and blood stains on the ground after a missile strike hit a railway station in Kramatorsk in East Ukraine on Friday. More than 30 people were killed and over 100 wounded at the station, packed with women, children, and elderly evacuees. Head of Ukrainian Railways says at least 2 children were among the dead. Kramatorsk Major says about 4,000 people had been at the station at the time of the attack.
VOA's correspondent Anna Chernikova joins us now from Ukraine on the situation. Hello, Anna. I mean, over the weekend, we heard news stories of villages in Ukraine scarred by Russian occupation. Give us an idea of the atmosphere, the towns affected, and how people are feeling at this moment.
We were able to get into the cities in Kyiv region, and not only governmental services, but also journalists and volunteers. What you can, feel physically and emotionally is a lot of pain, is a lot of, a lot of destructions that you can see, a lot of lives that have been wasted there, and it's quite shocking images when you come. A lot of people are working hard to make able civilians to come back to these territories, but unfortunately, most of the time during the week, the cities are closed due to demining procedures which are going on. So in general, there is a feeling of certain catastrophe, of certain apocalypses when you enter those towns. And it's very, very hard to imagine that just months ago, a little bit more than months ago, these were, young and modern little towns next to the capital of Ukraine, capital of the biggest country in Europe.
Also, Anna, are people still returning to parts of Ukraine, especially the towns that Russian troops have withdrawn from? I know that the mayor of Kyiv said that it really wasn't safe yet due to some of the dangers. What more can you tell us about the safety?
Nevertheless, a lot of people are coming back to Kyiv. If we talk about the city of Kyiv, it's quite safe here at the moment. It's quite calm here at the moment. So the only disruption sounds that you can hear for the past week are sounds of mines being exploded at the special locations next to the city. But otherwise, it is indeed quite safe. Of course, quite safe is not perfectly safe, and of course there is still a risk of attacks, of rocket attacks, because we still have air raid sirens every day, a couple of times, and during the night as well. If we talk about the Kyiv region, as I already mentioned, it's not yet a possibility to come back because of the demining procedures which are going on. A lot of mines being left by Russian troops, and it's not safe at all for people to come back. Some cities, like for example Hostomel, are closed for entrance for 1 week because of the demining. Some cities like Irpin, Borodyanka, and Bucha are closed for a couple of days, but I think that Borodyanka would also need quite longer to be finally demined and more or less safe for people to come back. So, of course, people want to come back. Some people are coming to check how their house or how their friend's house are doing, if it has been destroyed or not. But for the moment, there is no even negotiation or question about permanent return.
And Anna, we're also understanding that people are moving from Mariupol to Russia. How true is that? And are they leaving of their own free will?
It's deportation. What is happening right now in Mariupol, it's definitely not by their own will. What civilians who managed to escape the city told that there is actually Russian troops, they do not ask. They just tell that, okay, you have to go. What we also know is that places where they are taking on the territory of Russia, it's kind of a filtration camps, and families are separated, and people don't know exactly where they are going. So unfortunately, this is what we know, and some people, they risk their life just to escape with any mean of transport they can, and time to time it is possible. So people escape and they risk, and when they're asked why did you take that risk, they're saying that, well, we don't want to be deported or killed, and it was the only way, the only chance for us to survive.
So how true is it? Earlier this morning, there were reports of 9 humanitarian corridors opened, and I think one was opened in Mariupol.
For the moment, there is no information about any success. I'm talking about Mariupol right now, and unfortunately, there is not much belief that it would be possibility for people to escape Mariupol. Again, I would like to emphasize that some people managed to escape with their own transport or their own mean of transportation, but official corridors are not working. Russian forces do not let people out and do not let any humanitarian aid in.
Also, perhaps staying with Mariupol, we understand that a brigade in that port city said they're running out of ammunition. I mean, are there people who are still trapped there? What are you learning about the situation in Mariupol?
The head of military operations of Ukraine made a little comment on that, and he emphasized that there is really a problem with ammunition. This is true, and we all understand that this actually the case, because this is what the 47th day of war right now, and Mariupol is blocked for almost all the time. Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military forces are working very hard. They are doing what they can, believable and unbelievable things to support Ukrainian forces, to support military forces, territorial defense. So what we know is that there is a problem, but this problem is more or less taken under control. We don't have any specific information on that. I think it's kind of a secret information, so there is no official, official sources providing that information. But yes, there is a problem, and as we know, it's more or less taken under control.
Anna, thanks a lot for bringing us up to speed on what's going on in Ukraine, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
In the meantime, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted Helsinki and Stockholm to consider joining NATO, although long-neutral Sweden is more hesitant than Finland, which has a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. As non-members, Finland and Sweden's combined population of 16 million do not have the protection of NATO's guarantee that an attack on one ally is an attack on all. So if either country does go for NATO membership, Finland looks set to move first, according to diplomats.
In the days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, support for NATO membership in Finland specifically surged into the majority for the first time. It reached 62% in a second survey conducted in mid-March by a public Finnish broadcaster. In Sweden, we've seen similar shifts. 51% of people now support NATO membership. This is up from 42% in January. So even though the two countries are basically as close to NATO as you can get, without actually being members, the Russian invasion has really shifted public opinion, and now the two countries are looking for NATO membership because of the benefits that come along with it, namely NATO's Article 5, which is its mutual defense clause. There's a few questions. First, the question of whether or not Finland will apply for membership without Sweden, the question of whether both of them will do it together, and the question of when it will actually happen, if it will be ready to go in time for the Madrid summit in June. We should start by saying that Finland is further along in the process than Sweden at the moment. So what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is that the government is going to give the Finnish parliament a review on how Russia's decision to attack Ukraine has fundamentally changed Finland's security. And then based on whether or not there's sufficient support from parliament, the government is ready to quickly propose actually joining the alliance. So that means that they'll approach NATO and go through the accession process. Now, the support for Sweden is coming along. I think it's it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like quite yet. But the assumption is that it will be not far behind Finland.
The Kremlin says the possible accession of Sweden and Finland to the NATO military alliance would not bring stability to Europe. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was speaking at a press conference where he informed that Russia insists that the alliance remains a tool geared towards confrontation, and its further expansion will not bring additional security to the European continent. Last week, a US State Department official said the prospect of Finland and Sweden joining NATO was part of the discussion between foreign ministers from the military alliance in Brussels.
I'd like to warn you regarding the next video you're about to see. Some might find them quite disturbing. It's a video posted on social media, verified by Reuters news agency, and geolocated to an area west of Kyiv, appearing to show Ukrainian forces shooting and killing a captured and badly wounded Russian soldier. 3 rounds were fired by an off-camera individual into the soldier, who's wearing one of the white armbands used by Russian forces. He's bleeding heavily, lying on a road beside a dead soldier, and appears to be breathing with difficulty. The video then pans to 2 other dead soldiers in the road who also have white armbands. One of them has his hands tied behind his back and has been shot in the head. A Russian armored vehicle has been abandoned nearby. Reuters could not establish the exact date of the video, which was first reported by the New York Times. Ukraine's Yunnan news agency published footage of the shooting's aftermath on March 30. Apparent Ukrainian forces in the video are Russian-speaking. At least one had a Caucasian accent, and others had accents typical of places in southern Russia, all parts of eastern Ukraine. As some of them shouted glory to Ukraine. At least one wore a blue armband used by the Ukrainian army, but their affiliations are not clear. One of them had a Ukrainian flag patch on his arm, but that was upside down. Pakistan's parliament has selected Shahbaz Sharif as the country's new prime minister after Imran Khan was ousted in a no-confidence vote in the early hours of Sunday. The opposition coalition leader who had worked to depose Mr. Khan won the support of a majority in parliament.
Shahbaz Sharif will now form a new government that can remain in place until elections are due in August 2023. 69-year-old Imran Khan was voted out after days of high political drama. Analysts said there were signs that Khan had lost the support of the army, which has ruled the country for nearly half of its 75-year history.
Khan instead insists he's the victim of an international conspiracy, claiming the United States wanted him gone for his recent foreign policy moves, including a trip to Moscow to meet President Vladimir Putin. Washington has rejected the charge, but it has resonated with his supporters, who also took to the streets of Islamabad following the vote.
Khan's ouster after 3.5 years in office extends Pakistan's unwanted record for political instability. No prime minister has completed their full term since independence in 1947, although Khan is the first to be removed through a no-confidence vote.
About those protests, thousands of former Prime Minister Imran Khan supporters of his has poured out into the streets of the Pakistani cities late Sunday, just a day after the incumbent leader lost a no-confidence vote in Parliament. Now, those crowds held placards and waved flags of Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party as they chanted slogans. Khan had previously called for protests on Sunday. He had antagonized the United States, as I said earlier, throughout his tenure, welcoming the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan last year, and more recently accusing the United States of being behind the attempt to oust him. Washington has dismissed the accusations. According to the protesters, they do not want Khan out of office, and they claim that any friend of America is a traitor. Smaller rallies were held in Quetta, Peshawar, Medan, and other cities. Opposition politician Shahbaz Sharif submitted his nomination to be Pakistan's next prime minister to the legislature on Sunday.
We go over to France now, where French President Emmanuel Macron, fresh off a first-round victory in his quest for re-election, jumped straight back onto the campaign trail today. He hunted for more re-election support in France's former industrial heartland in the north, a blue-collar stronghold of far-right rival Marine Le Pen, who he will face in an April 24 runoff vote. Macron, 44, is vying to become the first president in 2 decades to win a second term, but faces a tough challenge from Le Pen, who has tapped into anger over the cost of living and the perception that Macron is disconnected from everyday hardships. Voters in Denain who joined a crowd to meet Macron interrogated some of his policies, expressing their disapproval of pension reforms and vaccines, while others congratulated him and wished him well for the second round. Well, the town of Denain once prided itself as the mining and steel capital of France, but where in 2019 almost half of the population lived in poverty and 1 in 3 people of active age were unemployed in 2018. Le Pen on Sunday won 42% of votes in the town. Left-wing voters will be crucial to determining the outcome of the election. Hard-left veteran Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came a close third on Sunday, told supporters not one single vote should go to the far right, but he stopped short of endorsing Macron. An Interior Ministry account showed that with 97% of votes counted, Macron had won 27.60% of vote support. Le Pen secured 23.41% and Mélenchon 21.95%. Polls predict a close-fought second round, with one survey projecting Macron will win with just 51% of the vote, 49% for Le Pen. The gap is so tight that victory either way is within the margin of error. A Le Pen win would send shockwaves across Europe and beyond. beyond and deliver a similar jolt to the establishment of Britain's Brexit vote to leave the EU or Donald Trump's 2017 entry into the White House?
Bonjour madame, vous allez bien? Ça va. Ça va? Moi je suis pas répondu bien. Merci à tout le monde. Non, pas tout le monde. J'ai voté pour vous mais je regrette. Ah, alors dites-moi pourquoi. Pourquoi vous faites sauter les privilèges?
Now, French far-right presidential candidate Marine Le Pen says she will continue her campaign into the presidential runoff with calm and determination, learning lessons from a previous duel with incumbent Emmanuel Macron. Macron and Le Pen came out on top in Sunday's first-round vote, setting up a repeat of the 2017 runoff between pro-European economic liberal and Eurosceptic nationalists. Senatorial ministry counts show that with 97% of votes counted, Macron had won 27.60% of the votes, while Le Pen secured 23.41. It was actually 28 by the end of the night. Before a meeting with her allies at a campaign headquarters in Paris, Le Pen said today, we're also tackling the second round with our experience from 5 years ago, which of course would be very useful. Polls predict a close-fought second round, with one survey projecting Macron will win with just 51% of votes and 49% for Le Pen. A gap is so tight the victory either way is within the margin of error. Le Pen has brought the image of her far-right party closer to the mainstream at a time when France has also lurched to the right in the wake of Islamist attacks. And even so, her softer, less combative manner belies a hardline anti-immigrant program. It's been a focus on the cost of living issues troubling millions, and her ability to connect with common folk that has proved particularly popular.
Or more about the poll coming from a French pollster reporting that 2 days ahead of the first round of ballots, French far-right presidential challenger Marine Le Pen has never been closer to victory than the current race. Now, incumbent Emmanuel Macron, whose re-election seemed a foregone conclusion just weeks ago, is now facing a stiff challenge from her. Now, her solid comeback in opinion polls has put a victory within, that margin in some surveys. Unlike in 2017, many voters will not resort to block voting against Le Pen if the reassemblement national leader pierces into the second round, a situation that led Macron to victory in the last election. Now, Le Pen has centered her campaign on purchasing power, successfully softening her image and tapping into voters' main concern, promising to cut taxes. And while she has not changed the core of her party's anti-immigration platform, which would strip foreigners of many rights and ban the hijab in all public spaces, she has not focused her campaign on that. Rival far-right candidate Eric Zemmour's radical, outspoken views has helped her look more mainstream. And this has also left many left-wing voters who have told posters that, unlike in 2017, they will not vote in this second round to keep Le Pen out of power. In the northern French seaside resort, where Macron is set to vote, many voters continued there to vote their trust for the incumbent. But some said international issues, notably the Ukraine crisis, prevented his campaign from running at full speed. Many experts have forecast record abstention rates. One of the voters said that in Le Pen's northern French stronghold of Hennebeau-Mont, he said he plans to issue a blank vote as nothing is concrete in candidates' platforms. He also said a high abstention rate, which will be most likely driven by young left-wing voters from the popular class, would hurt Le Pen in the first round, but will help her in the second. He also said a Le Pen victory would change France's reputation on the world stage.
Joining us now is French journalist Ludovic Kenman. He's in Paris. Ludovic, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Good day.
Yeah, Sunday's election was déjà vu for many people in France. President Macron has faced off with Marine Le Pen before, right?
Right. Yes, we wrote on Sunday for the presidential elections, yes. And today's election was a déjà vu for most people in France. President Macron has faced off with Marine Le Pen like for 5 years. And it's unfortunately déjà vu. In the first round of election in 2017, Emmanuel Macron recorded 24% of the vote. Marine Le Pen recorded 21.30%. At that time, the traditional right-wing political party with François Fillon still had 20% of the votes. But this year for this election, Valérie Pécresse represents this party. But unfortunately, she wanted to impose a harder social and migratory orientation to win votes from Marine Le Pen. But it didn't work as expected, yes. And financial affairs in France have tainted the idea that citizens have of politics. Emmanuel Macron wants to change that in 2027. Since then, the French are well aware of it. There are a lot of opportunities in politics, and the French don't want it anymore. They want honest, fair politics that defend their interests. Only Emmanuel Macron is capable of defending our interests or interests of French people, yes.
And reports say Mr. Macron won a convincing first-round victory. I mean, he got, I think it was 28.1% at the end of the night. So why then does this election go into second round?
Yes, French presidential elections are conducted using the named runoff voting, which ensures that the elected president always obtains a majority. If no candidate receives this majority of votes in the first round of voting, so the two highest scoring candidates are at the runoff. So, yes.
And why has the president been unpopular before the election?
I don't think the president was very unpopular before this election. The error that our candidate and still current president of the Republic may have made is not to have spoken more to the French people, but try to put yourself in his shoes for just one day. Emmanuel Macron currently chairs the Council of Europe and must manage the crisis in Ukraine. He's responsible for diplomacy. He's one of the few in Europe to keep close contact with Vladimir Putin to protect Europeans from a real threat of war. In addition, he must also manage the health crisis, which is far from over. It's not finished, and yet it's very complicated, actually. And finally, the affair of the country, too. We are 67 million French people, and I let you imagine the workload of your president. So in this context, how to make you a good campaign. Also the Yellow Vest crisis and COVID are two crises that still leave a lot of scars in the country, as is the case in many countries around the world. But which country in the world has invested 32% of its domestic product in health and social services in 5 years? So yes, I tell you, Emmanuel Macron is not unpopular in our country.
And Ludovic's reports, rather, he is set to make history if re-elected. What do the people of France want?
That's a great question. Emmanuel Macron has already written the history of France. He was, for 5 years, the president. We will have made the pride of being French, like no one before since the election of General de Gaulle. In 5 years, he had a statement on country economy, lowered unemployment despite COVID, the Yellow Vest crisis. He has given more rights to people with disabilities. He has worked a lot for women's rights, parity. He reformed unemployment insurance. He also reformed part of education by promoting the learning of a trade rather than requiring higher education. He has done so much, and through despite all these crises that I mentioned already before. I don't think, yes, I think Emmanuel is already, has already written the history of France, yes.
That's very interesting. Let's talk about his main rival, and he's faced her before, Marine Le Pen, and her rise to this point. She poses a major threat to Macron's re-election. Has she got enough support to pull that off?
What about Marine Le Pen? Marine Le Pen is the very symbol of evil, hatred, and intolerance for our country. France is a great country with a great history. France has always been a generous land, and that is why we are made like this. In a country with so many different nationalities, religion, and cultures, you have to learn to live together. I live in a region where my grandparents experienced the horrors of the First and Second World Wars, where youth, homosexuals, and disabled people were sent to death camps, where my grandfathers were sent to the war in front of Russia. 60 years later, the vestiges are still very numerous here. Alsace, the region where I grew up and where I always live, fought to be French. Today we're fighting to be Europeans. It's a guarantee for the freedom in Europe. When you ask me if Marine Le Pen has been sufficiently well supported by the people and the media, I answer that she's too much supported.
That's pretty interesting. And so we await the 24th of April for the runoff. What happens until then?
Yes, and the second round of election is scheduled for the 24th of April. Many political parties with very low scores have already called for vote for Emmanuel Macron. Our greatest thanks go to Jean-Luc Mélenchon and his party. Despite his disagreement with Emmanuel Macron's programs, he called last night, quickly after the official results, to counter Marine Le Pen by voting Emmanuel Macron on the 24th of April. For his part, Emmanuel Macron has already launched an appeal to all to discuss and arrange his program so as to bring together as many French citizens around the single and same project. The intelligence of Emmanuel Macron here in France, it is here. It is in his ability to listen to the people and his openness to discussion. In the end, there will remain the legislative elections of June, and which will give the future president the power to carry out this program or not.
Ludovic Skinman, thank you so much for speaking with us, and we'll be referring to you for updates on this election.
Thank you.
And as we had earlier told you, Pakistan's parliament has selected Shahbaz Sharif as the country's new prime minister after Imran Khan was ousted in a no-confidence vote in the early hours of Sunday. The opposition coalition leader who had worked to depose Mr. Khan won the support of a majority in parliament, and Shahbaz Sharif will now form a new government that can remain in place until elections are due August 2023. Now let's tell you a bit about his profile, the man Shahbaz Sharif.
That's right. He's a leader of the front. He is the front, or was the front runner to become Pakistan's next prime minister. And it was, of course, before earlier today when he was confirmed by the country's parliament. After Imran Khan was ousted on Sunday, he lost a vote of confidence in parliament. Now, that ouster happened after Khan was deserted by coalition partners who blame him for a crumbling economy and failure to deliver on his campaign promises. Sharif is affiliated with the Pakistan Muslim League. He's been in in ousted Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's shadow during their 3 decades in politics, forging a reputation as a workaholic administrator obsessed with infrastructure mega projects in the vast Punjab province, a family's power base that is home to more than half of Pakistan's 190 million people. His hands-on style as Chief Minister of Punjab, peppering officials with WhatsApp messages in the dead of the night, has won him admirers in the provincial capital, Lahore. A Mughal-era city spruced up with slick highways and manicured boulevards.
Yeah, and Sharif's governing style is in sharp contrast to Nawaz's hands-off approach, but the two brothers espouse a similar pro-business ideology. The biggest difference may be in their relations with the military, which plays an outsized role in Pakistani politics and currently controls key areas of policy, such as relations with India and the United States.
We'll make a brief stopover now in Ukraine again, with every reports of profiling and detention of Nigerians and other African nationals in Poland this time in the detention centers there, something the Nigerian government, through the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, has condemned. It was stated by the commission's chairman, Abike Dabiri-Erewa, that the psychosocial trauma clinic for Ukraine returnees, organized in partnership with the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons and Project Victory Call Initiative in Abuja. She says that though President Muhammadu Buhari had made every necessary arrangement for Nigerians caught up in the war in Ukraine to return home, some chose to remain in countries like Poland, stressing that the most appropriate action for Poland to take was to return them back to their countries rather than keeping them in torturous detention centers.
Now, I know that as I speak with you, there's another crisis brewing. Some of the returnees who went to Poland. Now, there were some Nigerians, when they got to Poland, Romania, Hungary, they didn't want to come back. And we said, it's voluntary. But some who went to Poland and refused to come back and are not properly documented are now locked up in detention centers under very inhumane conditions. Now they are being locked up in detention centers because of the color of their skin. The whites are not being locked up in detention centers, but blacks that are in Poland are being arrested. They will tell you don't have a documentation, although you are a refugee that are freed from Ukraine, and they are being locked up in very terrible circumstances in detention centers in Poland. This is unacceptable. Everybody should read it and tell the those you put in detention centers. The worst you can do is send them back to their countries. Although we as Nigeria, thanks to President Buhari, gave everyone the opportunity to return.
I'd just like to encourage the recipients of these services to take advantage of it. It's available for you. In Nigeria, when we talk about mental health, we think somebody is alone. But mental health means that you want to just address some issues, things are going around your head, so that you know that you're not alone and you have support, and you just discuss things that are happening in your life with people. So we're here to support you 100%. I'm looking forward to the success of this program and to future collaborations with the BBC platform, and I welcome you all today.
Meanwhile, the Nigerian ambassador to Poland, Ambassador Christian Ugu, says the federal government did all it could to help evacuate Nigerians fleeing the war in Ukraine, but that some Nigerians chose to avoid contact with the Nigerian mission in Warsaw, and some may have ended up in detention camps in the country.
That's right. Ambassador Ugu says there were initially 16 Nigerians known to the embassy in detention, 10 of whom have been released, while the other 6 are being attended to. He says he is confident they will soon be released. And that's the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
I'm Millicent Walker.